Welcome to this second episode of Basically Speaking, a video podcast series where we talk about important social and technological issues in very simple and everyday language. As always, I'm joined by Professor Devinder Thapa, and today we are going to pick his brains about mythology, stories.
Full of dirt.
Yeah. So we're going to pick his brain. We'll try to pick his brain on issues like mythology, science and technology, philosophy and philosophy of technology.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
sounds great. Yeah.
Sounds great. Okay. So actually, I was watching this movie Kalki recently, and I liked how they tried to. So I'm talking about why this idea for this topic came. So the movie is a sci-fi movie, but it's not unlike the sci-fi movies in the West we are used to.
Not like Star Wars.
Not like it's inspired by Star Wars to some sense, but I was interested. It was interesting in the fact that it kind of integrated sci-fi with mythology. So
that sounds interesting.
Yeah. So I was interested. Why not talk about these issues today?
Yeah.
So to begin with, I'd like to ask you, how does these heroic stories about gods and goddesses, if I have to ask you, how have they mattered in your life?
In my life?
Yeah.
Okay.
Let's begin with that. So, like growing up, or like
Hindi in Nepali also, I think. We call mithya.
Mithya.
It's not real, right?
Not real, yeah.
So it's mithya. It comes from the mithya, the myth.
Myth.
So sometimes people don't like when they say Hindu mythology. They say, no, it's not a mythology. It's the true logy.
True logy.
Anyway.
Yeah.
Because you know, now we will have a biggest festival in Nepal and India called the Dashaira.
Yeah, Dasai.
Dasai is like Christmas or Eid in other part of the world. It's the biggest festival.
Yeah.
So you can say my encounter being born in the family is my grandmother used to read Ramayana. It's a theatrical performance of this Ramayana. And it's not the religious part, but it was more like culture, you know. So everyone used to come together, and then we were kids and then watching this theater, but not about the story. Maybe that was somewhere in the background. But most fun part was when actor used to do some mistakes.
Yeah.
Right? So if this actor, the main hero, is using arrow and then killing the Ravana, the villain, right? And then sometimes actually it doesn't go in the target. Yeah. So he used to go that side, and this guy used to pick this arrow himself, and then some memories. Yeah. However, it doesn't mean that's how it influenced my thinking. But I think myth plays a very important role. As if you read the book The Power of Myth from John Campbell, and then even the Carl Jung, the psychologist, he says this myth plays very important role in psychology, how we build our psychologies, right? So myth, according to John Campbell, he said, myth is a public dream.
Public dream.
Dream. Yeah. So that actually influences how we behave, even the culture and everything. So it has a bigger role in how it molds our behavior.
How, when we talk about myths and we talk about these heroic stories about gods and goddesses, they really come from our most of these stories come from religious texts or from stories that have been handed down from generations to generations. So you made a point, like, we're not mythologists as such. We are interested in myths, and also we will not touch upon whether or not these stories are real or not. Our discussion would not venture into that territory. But so I was interested in discussing about how these stories or these tales which are present or which were handed down to us since like prehistorical times. So how do these stories kind of are used to kind of formulate a vision of the future? So as like the things that happen in the movie as well, Kalki as well, where like we see a character who is like a character from Mahabharata, like Aswathama, and how like over generations and time period in the distant future is connected with those characters and those stories. So in a way, how do science and myth or like mix together?
So that is completely based on my understanding, right?
Yeah, obviously.
I think because there was a time when I wanted to know what is the root of all the knowledge. So I found like maybe science is not the root of the knowledge. What is this? Is the philosophy? And then one point I thought maybe philosophy is the root of all knowledge. But then realized no, before philosophy there were myths, folk tales and all that, right? So that was a way of explaining the phenomena around the world. Because when we were conscious, we wanted to know how all this cosmology and everything orders is happening, right? Why this is happening. So I think the first thing they found is the myths. Okay, so they said, okay, the sun god and moon god, and you say, okay, for example, in Nepal, when we say it's raining, so Indra, the rain god, may be angry. That's why it's raining so hard. Or when there's no rain, even we used to do some kind of worship to rain god, right? So I think that's how the myth was kind of way of explaining the natural phenomena. The scientists started to see again some relation with the myth. What they're saying is, okay, you see, those myths, but actually they have imagination of AI. Suppose they also talk about automata, even in Greek history or in the Indian mythology or Greek methodology, or not methodology, sorry, mythology, or Egyptian mythology. So they talk about automata, right? A robotic system, and then even the what is it? I don't know. Vahan.
The flying vehicles, or like the driverless chariots. Driverless.
So the imagination was there. So now this science and technology is actually, if you see, so we cannot say that this imagination was not there. But what science and technology is doing is they're actually actualizing those imaginations, right? So from my understanding, as I said, mythology was a way of actually understanding the phenomena. And then I don't think it's still gone, because when I was listening to Campbell, so what he was saying is still we have those myths of heroic myth and all that, right? So we still use those myths in a different way. So his idea is when people use mythology in ancient time, they have a real meaning of it. I mean, they knew how to explain things by use myth. Nowadays, we use myth in a very different way. We don't think it has some deeper root in some culture and all that. We think, it's a myth, but it was not like this.
So that's an interesting point, when how you said that how in the olden times we had myths to explain our curiosities about the world, about the nature. And now we have science. So do you think, because as far as my basic understanding, when we were told that even I grew up in a Hindu community and in a Hindu family, so we were always told that these are not myths, these are truths about our gods and goddesses. And but now we are in a scientific age, and a lot of science kind of debunks these ideas and asks evidence, and a lot of times there are limited evidence of these things. So do you see that there's still conflict between science and these stories, or do you think there can be a bridge between these two areas?
You're right. I mean, sometimes the hardcore scientists, they say, okay, myth has no place. I mean, it's just it's just a bullshit. But then if you read the philosopher like Heidegger, they will say that no, actually there are many things which we cannot explain.
So for our audience, when we say Heidegger, we can briefly talk about him?
Yeah, now you put me into pressure. So Heidegger is a German philosopher, and there's an elephant in the room, which we need to clear. He is one of the most famous philosophers of 20th century.
Okay.
The elephant in the room is that his political ideologies was not very good. He was connected to the Nazi party. So sorry for that. But then there are brilliant people whose personal life is not very good, right? So I'm not talking about Heidegger. I'm talking about his philosophy. And the best part of his philosophy is because he completely, you can say, put the Western philosophy upside down. He's saying is in the Western philosophy, when philosopher asked what is being, they said, for example, human being. What is human being, right? And they said, human being is if you see the Descartes, he said, is a thinking thing, right?
Thinking thing.
We think, therefore we are.
Okay.
So someone will say, no. Aristotle will say, no, it's just some matter with form, right? And then he says, this is what. Or something like that. So his idea, Heidegger idea is, no, it's not like we are something out there sitting and then someone comes and doing some observations. We are being in the world. We are actively engaged in everyday activity. Okay, this is how we need to understand all the tools and beings and things around us.
Okay.
Because it is meaningful, we engage in everyday practice, and that's how actually we make meaning of all the things and things around us.
Yeah.
So that was his idea.
So going back to mythology and Heidegger, so you were linking Heideggerian ideas with
so his ideas, because we cannot understand if you want to understand human being, so we cannot use this biology, right?
Okay.
I can put you on the table and then do the anatomical examination of your body. That's not how I will understand you.
Okay.
Right? You are a being who is actively engaged, who has this myths and culture and norms and meanings. Many things actually make you,
not just the biology.
Not the biological, right? So that's where the science actually differentiate from the myth. So maybe myth has some role, right, in forming our being. So we cannot discard completely by saying that, okay, the science is the right one to understand, other things are useless. So this is where I think still myth plays an important role in how we think, how we act, how we behave, or how we, even when we design this kind of statue, there's some meaning, right?
We've now touched upon philosophers. So are there any examples where philosophers or scientists have used ideas from myths to explain scientific phenomenon or theoretical phenomenon?
So one of the very famous book, which is here, the Tao of Physics, right?
Okay.
Because this, if you look into the physics, especially when the quantum physics come into, started to play a very important role in the research, and then they started to feel like the existing scientific theories are not able to explain this phenomenon.
Okay.
Right. So then Fritjof Capra, a very famous physicist, who actually tried to bring this mystic element
to physics.
That's to understand this quantum physics. So what he says is, so he explained in a very nice way. He says, I was sitting on a beach looking at the sea waves, and then suddenly it was evening, Then I saw like these particles are moving here and there.
Okay.
And then he said, then suddenly it reminds me about the Nataraja, the
Shiva. The dancer.
The Shiva, who has this dancing here and there. So, because in Hindu myth, Shiva is the symbol of creation and destruction, right?
Destruction,
So then he said, I saw like particles creating itself and destroying itself. This destruction, construction, this dance is going on. And then he wrote the whole book.
Okay.
It's one of the most famous book actually, later. Tao of Physics, right?
Okay.
Similarly, it's not just the contemporary scientist. If you think about Plato, right? So he has a very interesting allegory of cave. Maybe you heard about this. So allegory of cave is there's a cave, and then many people sitting inside the cave, and there's kind of projector, and then they're putting the shadow on the screen. So people sitting inside the cave, they can only see the shadow on the screen.
Okay.
And then they think this is actually reality, right? Whatever you see in the screen is the reality. And then one day, one of this person inside the cave, he came out, and then suddenly he saw the sun.
The sun.
The real sun. And then he almost got blinded. And then when he reopened, and then he saw, oh, the real world is very different. It's not like the shadow I used to see in the screen, right? So then he found it really enlightening. So this is a symbol of when you get enlightened, when you really understand the reality, then what happens? First you get very scared, but then you actually understand, okay, this is the real thing, right? The thing that I used to think is a reality was not actually reality. It was some kind of fake reality which was projected on the screen, right? When this guy came inside the cave to tell others, then you know what may have happened. Any idea?
I mean, I suppose I haven't.
No, they just blindly.
I can say that people will not believe him.
Exactly. So then they start to say that this guy is actually just telling us fake thing. This is the reality out here, not outside. So the idea is, if you see this cave allegory, doesn't it make sense in contemporary world? If you think about social media, sometimes I feel like I'm also someone sitting inside the cave. So we think that all reality is out here in the screen, right? And we don't know what exactly is going on out there. So this allegory of cave is actually very useful to describe the phenomena right now going on, right? So these are the power of this kind of mythical stories and all that. This is how I actually see, and I use this kind of examples in the classroom.
So when you're giving this example, it's made me think that I think in everyday language, when we're trying to explain things to others or we're communicating, we're kind of always using these metaphors from myths or from these stories as a reference, right? So if we say we have to be we need to have a focus like Arjuna, which means or like we need to be wise as Yudhishthir, or like as forgiving as some other characters. So it makes kind of like linking these things to everyday activities and how we make sense using these stories and metaphors as well. So now when we talk about philosophy as such, or philosophy of technology as self, and we also in the last episode we talked about AI. So how will these stories will they help us kind of understand about AI? Because a lot of stories have these visions of dystopia, like for example all the religious stories or religious texts or mythologies have a kind of a threatening vision of the future and of dystopia. So how do you see it? If in this case, how can myth inform us about our experiences with artificial intelligence or technology?
I think, as I said, the human imagination has not developed because of science and technology. Right? This imagination power was before science and technology. People used to think, and then they used to imagine. As I said, if you read any myth, they have the imagination of some robotic automata going and fighting. So what I was actually listening to one of the professor who did study in mythology and technology, what she was saying is the main way the technology was understood in the ancient time was mainly of three regions. That was sex, slavery, and power. So they used to have some kind of automata or some genie kind of some powerful something either they used to help you in one of these themes, right? Either the power, sex, or slavery. Okay. And the interesting thing this professor was saying, like Aristotle has said somewhere, if we use this automata for all the works that slaves are doing, then it will remove all the slaves. I mean, where will they go?
Okay.
Yeah. So slavery is not. We need to understand the context at the time, because the slavery was kind of a legal thing. So, but if you look, the same concept or the ideas in contemporary world, sex, slavery, and power. I think whatever technology we are designing, still they are focusing these things, right? If you are making a product around these themes, then it will be like viral or whatever. Exactly, right? So what the idea of Aristotle was this: if you make everything automated, then slave will actually die. I mean, they will not have any jobs. But if you think right now, if we automate all the jobs, what will happen?
People will lose their jobs.
Exactly. Think about the countries, those who don't have resources, right?
Exactly.
Who are not developed. And most of the things they are doing manually. Those jobs will be lost. So that's, how the myth actually teaches about our contemporary society. And then how they used to control. And then they said in mythology, if you see, whatever technology they use, but the control button was with them. Suppose if you created a robot or something, and it started to do some wrong thing, you used to kill, right, or curse or do something. So it has some implication for us as well. So when we are designing this kind of technology or AI or whatever, so the control needs to be with us still. Yeah, that's the idea, I think.
So when you're philosophizing or like using philosophy to understand these difficult things, do you think our understanding or our thinking that is influenced by myth helps us to kind of make sense of these things, or it maybe tries to oversimplify things?
No, I will not say oversimplify, because when we talk about artificial intelligence, most of the time we think about algorithm. That's where, if you read this essay concerning technology by Heidegger, he will say technology is nothing technical. So it's not about the technical things, right? So he said that the idea of technology, actually, it comes from the Greek word techne, which means practical wisdom, right? So you learn something through doing something practical. This traditional way of technology or revealing something or bringing forth something was easy. If you see carpenter, when they make the chair, so that he's carving the wood and then doing something, and then suddenly carpenter actually bring forth the chair. But he said that modern technology is not bringing forth. It is challenging forth. It means it's hiding more than revealing.
Okay.
So one example he gave is, like he said, if you think about the Rhine River, right? Rhine River in nature is a river. So there are poetry about river and all that. But modern technology put dam around the river.
Okay.
Right? And then they start generating electricity out of it. And then they're switching to different places. So, suddenly the river is revealed as some resources to exploit. Yeah. Right? It's standing reserve. So it's become something you exploit. So modern technology actually conceal, than actually revealing. Okay. That is a dangerous thing, according to Heidegger. Yeah. So you see how this philosophy help us to think critically, not just looking into the object, but what is the intention behind it, how it has been made, what exactly is the material. And who has designed it. We need to think about this.
Exactly. So when you mention about how it's important how these new technology emerge into being. So previously, as you mentioned, you gave an example of a carpenter making a chair. So we can see where it emerged from, how it was created, but now we don't see how these technologies are created, or what are the purpose or intentions behind them. It's what we call like it's hidden away from us, right? So is there a danger now when we are sticking to the idea or the topic of mythology and mytholizing? So are we in an era where we are using or are we trying to like we talked about hyping AI? Are we creating a myth around AI? And if there is a myth around AI, if we are presenting it as a heroic kind of entity, is it going on, and is it a good sign that we are using or mythologizing this AI? Is it a good sign, or is it something bad? Like you touched upon how it is hiding things as well.
So again, it has two aspects, right? Even in myth, if you see, they used to have some kind of weapon. Let's say they even in Kalki, right? There was some kind of bow. So it's not like everyone can use that. So there was someone actually gifted who was very ethical and moral. Who knows how to use these things, right? So they used those technologies for the betterment of the society. So that's something we need to derive in. So when we are talking about responsible AI or ethics and AI, so the onus goes to the human being, right? How we create human, not the AI. How we create human more responsible, more ethical. So we need to. I think now the MITs actually, I heard they started to hire philosophers. Otherwise, they think philosophers go to the street and start begging. Just kidding. So I think the philosopher has now more important role actually in bringing this kind of myth unfolding, how this modern technology is hiding, or what possibilities it can bring. It's not like it's just hiding, and sometimes we don't want to know everything, right? If something is doing good for us, for example, if this laptop is helping us to get the information, why do we need to understand what are the codes actually written here, how this all motherboard and then circuits are working, right? It's better to be black box. But then, as I said, but there's a dangerous if it started to goes out of control, as in myths. Maybe you know about the Bhasmasur.
Bhasmasur,
right?
Who got this blessing that with the power to turn anyone into ash.
And the whole idea was he wanted to kill Shiva. And then someone has to intervene, Vishnu, right? And then now you see this, the idea of avatar was also there. So he changed into a woman, and then he said, okay, you can get what you wish.
Exactly.
But then you have to actually dance with me. So they start dancing, and in one of the moves, this lady put her hand on the head, and then this Bhasmasur also this like this, and then
self-destroyed.
So the idea is, do we have some kind of algorithm if it detects that the AI is not working in the right way? So we can, if it turn into Bhasmasur, do we have any way to actually stop this?
So you're saying that Vishnu was a hacker who hacked into this problem.
So we need someone all the time. That we need. There are bad guys, there are good guys, right? So we need to have this community policing. As Susanna Zuboff said in Surveillance Capitalism book, she said we need to come together and create some kind of policing system. Otherwise, it will not work. If just you and me are thinking, and everyone wanted to become a Bhasmasur, and then the world will be. Then the utopia, as shown in the Kalki, will be the reality.
Dystopia, I guess.
Dystopia, not utopia. Sorry.
Okay. So it was interesting. Like earlier, you mentioned about how Fizof Kapra used this idea of Nataraj to kind of understand quantum physics, and then you also just before you mentioned about this notion of avatar. It comes from Hindu mythology of turning avatar, and then it became a kind of a good concept to understand this how in digital space now, people are creating online avatars, and now we are talking about metaverse. So many ideas we are kind of borrowing from these stories.
Yes. So it helps us to understand better, right? Because nowadays the one danger when we are teaching our students only algorithms and writing codes and source codes, and then they are blinded with the bigger consequences of this thing, right? They just want to see how it works. Because one coder doesn't have this idea. But if we sensitize through these mythologies or metaphors, they will think in a better way, right? They will be more responsible while designing whatever AI system they will do that. Because you were telling me about this deep fake. You said we can train this presenter, and maybe we are also thinking of training some AI. So in the future, Thapa and Thapa
we don't have to record any videos, and we can just train an AI model which would replicate our moves and how we talk and how we deliver, and then we just sit in the background and just
you see that those were the avatars, right?
The avatars,
So I mean, mythology shows that the dangers of, especially if you look into Mahabharata and Ramayana, they use a lot of automatic weapon systems and a lot of biological weapon systems, and then even animal getting conscious, right? And then they're talking about this, do you remember this, because the king was blind, this Kaurav's father. Dhritarashtra was blind, and then his secretary, let's say Sanjay. He used to watch in some kind of TV screen, and he's explaining these things. You see,
that's where they got the idea for broadcast technology.
Like television. Video casting. So, I don't like when people say that. You see, this thing was already there. We were so advanced.
Exactly.
That's not correct. But what I agree is, yes, this imagination was there. Right? What Western sciences help us actually to somehow capitalize those imaginations. Right? So if we can think in a bigger picture and then see how in the myth those technology has been actually creating utopia or dystopia, then maybe we will be more responsible while creating these kind of systems.
So I think on that note, we kind of had a good conversation, and I think we kind of both agree that mythology has inspired a lot of good scientific innovation, our understanding about different kind of knowledge, and it needs to continue doing that. But at the same time, we also talked about how mythologizing about AI and technology can also have its harms. But at the same time, we need to inform the way we think about technology through these mythological stories and mythical stories and metaphors.
These are very powerful tool, I will say, to sensitize our students, and I think it makes the classroom interesting as well. At least when I use this kind of mythological stories in my class, even in cybersecurity master courses, students like that. They said, now we understand this thing from very different perspective. So they just say, we used to think technology is so simple. When we started discussing about it, we found like it's so complex, right? But these things are possible through bringing myths and then philosophy. However, then we need to relate with the real practices, right? It's not just saying, you see, the myth is already there. People so advanced 10,000 years ago or something like that. That's real. That's a history. That's something we need to be a little bit careful as a scientist. But at the same time, we should not completely discard this mystic element. That's what Pragyan Thapa says.
So before we end, you mentioned two people. First was Fritjof Capra and his book about Tao of physics, and you also talked a little about, in the earlier part, you talked about Joseph Campbell. So we have, can you briefly talk about their work?
Sure. So this is the book. Well, he was mythological expert, you could say.
So an expert of myth, expert on myth.
And as you know that he has written this book, 1,000 Faces.
Hero with 1,000 Faces.
Heroes with 1,000 Faces. And as you have a background of script writing, so you know how it influenced the script writer also. Right?
Yeah.
So it's not only script writing; it's so powerful in the psychology as well. Right? He used a lot of how our psychology is built. Because there's myth. So when Carl Jung says he used the archetype, right?
Archetypes.
So the archetype, this is there, is that make America great again. So that's one kind of heroic myth he's trying to actually implement in reality. Right? So, but they are not aware about this thing. But he said that's the idea of the myth, because it unconsciously influence our behavior, and we are not aware of that. That's the idea of this book. It's just very nice book. He went around the world, different communities, staying with them, and then understanding every myth has very. It's not a bullshit. At least there's a deep meaning behind it. Yeah, and we should respect that. That's right.
So this book is written as like in a conversational style with the author Bill Moyers.
Yeah, it's very much like a dialogue, like we are doing this.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
And I don't know, someday we will also write a book.
I hope so.
Pragyan Thapa. Yeah. So it's very much like that kind of dialogue. Yeah.
And people will maybe start talking about us in other podcasts.
Okay.
And the next book was Tao of Physics.
Yeah.
Or as you say, Dao of Physics. How is that?
Yeah, the Chinese pronunciation is, I think, is Dao. Dao means the way.
The way.
The way. So it's come from the Taoism. Yin and Yang, right? Yin Yang and Taoism. Yeah. So what he did is he used all the Eastern philosophy, and that's one of my interests. I like reading Eastern philosophy, Western philosophy, and what are the common things that we can use in science and information systems and ICT 4D, something like that. So he did a wonderful job. I think I recommend anyone to read this book. So he's explaining all this Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, and then connecting with the quantum physics. So that's a wonderful book. Reading this book, I came to know that about CERN, this Center for I don't know.
Is it in France?
There's some scientific research center, right? So they said in their gate actually there's a figure of the Nataraja.
Okay.
So it's here, but they said Nataraja. Okay, I can show it here actually.
Yes. So the Nataraja is blessing the scientific center, science center.
This is, if you see this picture.
Okay.
And if we read this we call it cosmic dance. And this chapter is so nicely explained. I mean, how this Nataraja. We need some theory to explain some phenomena, right? So he said, because we don't have any language right now, scientific language to explain that. So these mythical or mystic stories can help us to at least understand it.
It's like communicate what we're trying to say, right?
So basically speaking.
It's basically speaking. So myths are basically speaking.
The idea is when you want to speak and explain something simple, and then you use the myth.
Okay.
Because the Ramayana and Mahabharata, we have these 4 Vedas: Rig Veda, Ayurveda, and Samveda, and one more Veda. So people were not able to read those Vedas. Even it takes 10, 12 years to understand those languages, right? But then at the time there were people who wanted to basically explain those things.
Okay.
So they come up with this kind of stories. So Ramayana, Mahabharata, this myth is actually explaining those difficult texts in a very simple way. So that was there before, thousands of years ago. And I was talking to one of my Greek friends, and they were saying this thing was also there, right? But now maybe we need to bring that culture back again in the academia.
Yeah. So I think we had an interesting conversation where we talked about many things. But the center of our topic was mythology, heroic tales about gods and goddesses, and metaphors and allegories, and how they kind of relate to science and technology, about our understanding, about our concepts and theories. So that was, I think that on that note we can end the episode for this time. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and we expect more love from you guys. Please subscribe to our channel. And
even if you hate, please subscribe.
We are open to all kind of love and hate, everything.
Love and hate. And we are sweating because there's no AC in this room.
Yeah, exactly.
And the topic is also difficult. So
very, very, very difficult topic.
So, as you said, it was about myths, science, technology, and how it is related to contemporary society. So, I am pretty sure, because we are not expert in mythology and all that. Right?
But we are students.
We are students. So, whatever we discuss here is based on our understanding.
Yeah.
And then, if you found there's some error in our explanations, please feel free to write to us, correct us, and that's what we are looking forward.
Yeah. But so in the meantime, see you next time in Basically Speaking.
Yeah, with more myth and many hidden things.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Bye bye.
Bye.